May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Friends, at the end of Jesus' earthly ministry, so his resurrection and his ascension, it's estimated that there were around 500 believers, 500 people in total who believed in Jesus. By the end of the book of Acts, which is about 30 years later, the estimate is closer to 200,000. So in 30 years, it goes from 500 to 200,000 believers. And then by the 300s AD, not one part of the Roman Empire had not been penetrated by the gospel at that point. So what I want to do is we kind of think of the way that Christianity mushroomed in 300 years and how it went from being this just side thing to becoming the main religion of the Roman Empire. I want to just start backwards. So I started with Jesus and went up to the 300s. I want to actually begin with a quote from the 300s, and I want to work my way back with a few quotes. And I want to highlight something for us, which I think you'll pick up on here in a second. The first quote is by Emperor Julian. So just a little background. Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity in about 313 AD. Within one generation, his nephew, whose name was Julian, he tried to actually reverse things, and he wanted to restore paganism to the Roman Empire. His reign only lasted 2 years, but in those 2 years, he was trying to launch a pagan revival. And one of the ways that he was trying to do this is he organized actually an order of priests and deacons modeled after the Christian church and how the church was organizing itself with its diocese and all of that. And so here's a quote where he's writing a letter. Again, this guy is anti-Christian, even though he was baptized as a Christian. He's writing to his pagan high priest, and he's lamenting, and you'll see why he feels like the Christian church is succeeding and what he thinks they need to do about it. So, by the way, he calls the Christians, he calls them atheists, because in his mind, paganism is their true religion. And so he says this, he says, atheism, the Christian faith, has been especially advanced through the loving service rendered to strangers and through their care for the burial of the dead. It is a scandal that there is not a single Jew who is a beggar, and that the godless Galileans, again talking about Christians, care not only for their own poor, but they care for our poor as well, while those who belong to us look in vain for the help that we should render them. And so he basically makes this appeal to the high priest, like we need to start doing acts of kindness and benevolence to the poor, because this is how Christians are taking over through their care for the poor. Now, that's in that quote, 362 AD. Go back 100 years to the mid 200s. And this is from a body of Christian writing called The Shepherd of Hermas. It's a very well-respected and core Christian document. And we find in this document this description of what constituted a Christian's social duties. This is a quote, to minister to widows, to look after orphans and the destitute, to redeem from distress the servants of God, to be hospitable, to be gentle, to practice justice, to preserve the unity of the Christians, and not to oppress poor debtors. So this is a description of what constitutes a Christian's social duties. Go back 100 years, now to the time of Paul and his writings. In the book of Galatians, we have this recounting where Paul is talking about a disagreement between him and other Christians. And in this disagreement, they end up coming up with at least one thing they can agree on. And here it is. He's talking now, referring to the Christians in Jerusalem who were like Peter and James, the disciples of Jesus. He says, they asked only one thing. Like, they agreed that we would go separate ways, that I would go to the Gentiles and they would go to the Jews. But they asked only one thing, that we remember the poor. That's the one thing that was across the board, everyone could agree on. Now I want you to travel back with me from that time, which is about 30 years after Jesus' life. I want to come back to Jesus' actual words here, where all of these movements and this core belief of the church, where it comes from. Jesus' words that we heard this morning. Jesus says, "For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me." Jesus says, "Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food? When was it that we saw you thirsty and gave you something to drink, or saw you as a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? When was it that we saw you sick or in prison and we visited you?' And Jesus will answer, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did it for one of the least of these who were members of my family, you did it for me.'" So what I want us to see this morning is that for the early church, they didn't view their role of caring for the least in society as tangential. It wasn't just something that Christians do every now and then because it's a nice thing. Because we're Christians, we should probably care. And so I'll throw a couple of dollars here and there every now and then. No, this is one of these things, caring for the least and the marginalized. This was seen as the primary expression and expectation of the faith. The primary expression and expectation of the faith. And I'm not saying, like, I'm not emphasizing, I'm telling you what the fact was for the church. Their belief is and was, we preach the good news of Jesus and we care and advocate for the most vulnerable, starting with our own who are most vulnerable, and we expand to the rest of the community. That's what we do. We preach the good news of Jesus and we take care of the vulnerable. That was the mandate. Now, let me just give you a sense of just how seriously the earliest Christians took this mandate. In the book of Acts, chapter 4, we read this. "Now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul." I'd like to find out how they did that, by the way. And no one claimed private ownership of any possessions. Guys, listen to this, okay? No one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. With great power, the apostles gave their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. And there was not a needy person among them. For as many as owned lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold. They laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as they had need. How do you feel about that? Does that sound radical to you? How does that fit in with your existing frameworks? These are obviously rhetorical questions, because I know it's radical. It's insane when you think about it. How the church, the extent to which they went. If you look at Scripture's expectation was the tithe. You give a portion of your income, 10% of your income, back to God for the work of God in the world. With the early church, they were like, 10%. How about everything? We sell everything, we bring it, and then we share, all of us, from what is available to all. So now I want to just let you know that I'm not advocating that we do this. And even if I was advocating for it, it wouldn't go anywhere. I think you guys would be like, okay, that's nice, Sari. I wouldn't do that myself. But what I am advocating for today is that we do something that takes a lot of guts, I think. And that's to ask ourselves the question, and I want to invite you to do this, not triggered by anything, but truly just as a disciple of Jesus who wants to go deeper today. I want to invite you to ask the question, to what extent do I use my resources to advance the work of God in the world? To what extent do I use my resources to advance the work of God in the world? Do I give 1% of my resources? Do I give 2%? To what extent? Also, a question that takes a lot of guts to ask that I want us to just sit with today is, who are the most disadvantaged among us and in our community? And I'm not saying the most disadvantaged as long as they look like me, or the most disadvantaged as long as they're documented, or the most disadvantaged as long as they've committed no felonies. I want us to ask the question, who are the least advantaged people, the most disadvantaged among us and in our community? Who are the least? Who have the least rights, the least voice, the least dignity, the least resources? And to what extent am I using my time, my resources, my voice, my vote, my position, my privilege to care for the least? It takes a lot of courage to ask these questions. I think you'll enjoy this story. I have a friend who years ago was trying to buy a car, so we went online and he found this posting. The car looked amazing. So he calls the owner and he chats on the phone, and as a part of the conversation, was like talking about things, he finds out the owner of the car says to him, "Oh, by the way, you should know the engine doesn't run." And my friend was like, "Wait, what? I don't think I'm interested in the car that doesn't run." The guy's like, no, look, it has brand new wheels and it has a great new radio that I think you'll like. And my friend was like, what are those things if the car doesn't run? If the engine doesn't work? And I love that story. I love how clueless it was. And I love that the person didn't post on there, the engine doesn't run, just so that maybe you can get someone who's interested in tires and trying to offload this car to someone else. But the reason I share this story with you is what Jesus is describing in the story, in the parable that we heard this morning, where he talks about whatever you do to the least of these, you've done it to me. And that's how Jesus is going to look at humanity, those who served and those who didn't. What he's talking about, he's describing the heart of faith, the engine of faith. Let me just say this because I want us to hear it today. The engine of faith is caring for the least in the community. The engine of faith. Now, you might be like, well, Sari, isn't the engine of faith the relationship with Jesus? Isn't that the engine? I would say no. I think Jesus viewed that as the fuel. That's the fuel you put into the engine, and it runs the engine of faith, which is caring for one another in the community. And what's interesting in the story, if you'll go back and read it, is Jesus is actually acknowledging that he is not the only type of fuel that runs this engine. That there are others who have engines that run, that care for the poor and the marginalized, for the least of these, who give a cup of cold water to someone who's thirsty. And Jesus says, when he says to them, "Come to me, you who to whom the kingdom is meant, and who are meant to inherit the kingdom," and they say, "Well, how do we get this? We never knew you." And Jesus says, "Well, whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done to me." What he's saying is, your engine was running. Your engine was running, and that is what this is about. Is your engine running or not? You can have fuel, but you can have an engine that's dead, or you're not even using the fuel for anything. You can have Jesus, but you cannot be using that power in your life to serve the world. Having Jesus without the action, that's a dead faith. Is your engine running? And I want to today leave us with a question and a quote. The question is, how would our lives look different if we took Jesus's words here to heart? See, Jesus had kind of a strategy. And the strategy was that if rather than just thinking about others whom you have to help, you think of those who are least in the community as Jesus himself. Just, that's me. How would you treat me if you believed that? And I want us to hold that question today. How, if we really believed that the immigrant, that the prisoner, that the poor person on the side of the road, that's Jesus. And Jesus is saying, look, I don't know how you're going to miss this if you're reading this. That's me. How would our lives look different? How would we treat them differently? Here's the verse I want to end with today. It's from the letter of 1 John. John says, whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this commandment. Anyone who loves God must also love their brother and their sister. Let's join together now in the Agape Creed.